Welcome to Archivarius Noctis. Take a moment, sit back, relax, and step into the shadows with me. Here we explore true crime stories where truth hides in the dark and every detail matters. If you're ready to uncover what was forgotten, whispered, or buried, you're in the right place. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe, leave a like, and share this video with those who dare to look deeper. Now, let's begin. In the 1970s, the United States grappled with a frightening new reality. A murderer who did not lurk in shadows, but walked confidently among ordinary people. A killer whose greatest weapon was his ability to seem completely trustworthy. This man's name was Ted Bundy, a name that would come to define not just a criminal, but a chilling contrast between how someone appears and what they are capable of once no one is watching. Ted Bundy was born in 1946. His early life was cloaked in secrecy. For years, his family concealed his mother's identity, telling him she was his sister. This formative confusion, the hidden truths and fractured roots, set an unsettling psychological stage that would reverberate through his adult life. Growing up, Bundy was capable of charm that made people feel at ease. He was articulate, engaged in politics and volunteering, socially adept, and outwardly normal in every way. But beneath the surface, a darkness was growing. It first began with internal fantasies. Psychological experts later determined that Bundy's early violent thoughts were about control and domination, themes that would soon become action. Not long after his 27th birthday, his private world of fantasy and control erupted into a public pattern of violence. In January 1974, a young college student named Joni Lenz woke up one morning to find her life irrevocably changed. Bundy had entered her dorm room, struck her multiple times in the head and face, and raped her. Actions confirmed in medical reports documenting multiple areas of blunt force trauma surrounded by extensive bruising and swelling. When emergency room doctors later examined her, they found skull fractures and orbital bone compression, injuries consistent with forceful strikes with a heavy object. But it was not just physical injury. The forensic report indicated prolonged oxygen deprivation at the neck, which is medically associated with manual strangulation. Joni survived, yes, but the damage she endured would leave permanent scars. At the time, her assault went unexplained, and Bundy remained undetected, but investigators would later use her survival to connect the violence to a larger sequence of crimes. Weeks later, in Seattle, Washington, 21-year-old Linda Ann Healy vanished from her own home. Forensic investigators who later examined the scene noted something extraordinarily telling. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken doors, no broken windows, no overturned furniture. Such scenes are often the most chilling because they reveal a killer who either entered with a key, was let in by the victim, or had mastered silent entry techniques. In this case, it was Bundy. When Linda's remains were later located in a remote wooded area, forensic anthropologists documented evidence of multiple blunt trauma impacts to the cranial bones, followed by damage to the cervical cartilage consistent with full manual strangulation. The position of the remains, skeletonized, concealed under vegetation, suggested someone who was methodical, who knew how to move a body without detection, and who sought remote places to avoid discovery. Not long after, Donna Gail Manson, a college student in Olympia, disappeared. What made her case especially difficult for investigators was the absence of any remains for years. Forensic specialists describe this as a no-trace disappearance, the kind that leaves law enforcement baffled because typical physical evidence isn't available to reconstruct what happened. In Donna's case, the absence of remains was itself a clue, often indicating that a perpetrator had control over the location, timing, and disposal conditions, minimizing chances of discovery. Then came Susan Elaine Rancourt, last seen on her way to class. Months later, bones found in a ravine matched evidence of violent death. Forensic examination of her hyoid bone revealed compression fractures, a hallmark of manual strangulation. Forensic pathologists testified at later hearings that the force necessary to cause such fractures requires sustained pressure, indicating not just sudden lethality but a controlled, repeated act. Each of these early victims shared forensic signatures: neck compression injuries, clustered blunt force trauma points, transport to isolated locations, and burial or concealment beneath vegetation or soil layers. These signatures became essential in linking the crimes when law enforcement began comparing notes across jurisdictions. Bundy's method typically began with deception. He often approached his victims in places where they felt safe: college campuses, public parks, parking lots, and used a feigned injury or a pretext to reduce suspicion. He would sometimes wear a cast, carry books, or act as though he needed help. This deliberate technique was fundamental. It created a brief window of perceived safety, enough for him to engage his victim and avoid immediate resistance. The pair of abductions at Lake Sammamish State Park in July 1974 were particularly instructive of Bundy's evolving approach. Witnesses later described a man with a cast asking if someone would help carry his sailboat to the car. Janice Ott agreed, then vanished. When Denise Naslund disappeared later that same afternoon on the same beach, several witnesses confirmed a man with a similar appearance had spoken to her moments before she walked away with him. Later forensic excavation at the burial site uncovered these two victims together. Soil stratification studies showed two distinct deposition layers, suggesting the killer returned to bury the second body beside the first, an action requiring time, familiarity with the geography, and the audacity to reuse disposal sites. The forensic analysis from that site offered important clues. Pollen retrieved from clothing indicated a specific seasonal profile consistent with Lake Sammamish vegetation, and fiber matches from both victims contained identical polyester strands later associated with Bundy's vehicle upholstery, a rare but decisive match, considering the specificity of thread composition and weave patterns. In Utah, Bundy continued his spree with similar patterns. Nancy Wilcox, only 16, disappeared while walking near her home. Villagers and hunters later spotted shallow ground disruption where her remains rested. DNA and skeletal analysis confirmed blunt injury to the skull and neck compression. Another victim, Melissa Smith, was identified through skeletal remains showing signs of violent death. These death patterns were not isolated. They were part of an emerging forensic constellation: similar trauma, similar disposal methods, and similar victim profiles. The breakthrough came when Carol DeRonch survived her encounter with Bundy. She had been approached in a shopping mall parking area by a man identifying himself as a police officer. Her testimony later described his precise words, the way he produced false credentials, and the moment she realized she was in danger. Her account was corroborated when a search of Bundy's vehicle turned up handcuffs modified to restrain wrists and ankles, rope tied with specific knots, later explained by forensic rope specialists as purpose-built for immobilization rather than simple restraint. When law enforcement finally apprehended Bundy, forensic scientists undertook a systematic comparison of physical evidence collected from many sites: fiber analysis from clothing, soil samples from body lesions, and microscopic comparisons of trace elements. One crucial set of evidence came from the use of bite mark analysis, which later became central at trial. In the Chi Omega sorority house murders in Florida, a victim's body bore marks so distinctive that forensic odontologists were able to document them photographically, create overlays, and match them to Bundy's dental impressions. Dr. Richard Soveron, testifying in court, explained how the unique pattern of tooth spacing and enamel wear aligned precisely with the wounds. Pointing to transparent overlays compared to crime scene photos, Soveron stated in testimony, "The alignment of the dental arch and the location of specific notches on these teeth correspond within reasonable scientific certainty to the marks observed on the victim." That phrase, reasonable scientific certainty, carried weight in court because it translated hard physical evidence into a testimony jurors could understand and rely upon. During the Chi Omega prosecution, survivors described the physiological trauma they endured. Forensic medical reports entered into evidence detailed multiple fractured bones, deep soft tissue bruising, and neurological damage from repeated impacts. In one case, extensive damage to the facial bones required reconstructive surgery, and the medical testimony described localized hemorrhaging consistent with blunt force impact from a heavy object delivered at close range. a type of trauma surgeons rarely saw outside of motor vehicle collisions. The trial for Kimberly Leach's murder brought even more scientific witness testimony. Fabric analysts testified about fiber transfer, how microscopic fibers from the interior carpeting of Bundy's white van adhered to Kimberly's clothing and remained even after washing attempts. Laboratory technicians used polarized light microscopy to compare fiber refractive indices and dye characteristics, concluding that the fragments found on the victim matched the van's carpet fibers in both color signature and chemical composition. In addition, blood group typing played a role. Before DNA technology, blood typing and serological markers were used in court to help exclude or include suspects. Analysts testified that blood groups present on the victim's belongings and inside the van were consistent with Kimberly's type and with Bundy's, narrowing probability and reinforcing other evidence. Victim witness testimony also established a timeline. A crossing guard, hypnotically refreshed to recover details of her memory from outside the school on the day Kimberly disappeared, placed a man matching Bundy's description near the pickup location, the white van idling nearby, license plates obscured by tape. Though controversial, this testimony was admitted under controlled conditions and paired with physical evidence to build a cohesive narrative. Throughout these proceedings, Bundy attempted to control the courtroom and public narrative. During one hearing, he proposed marriage to his girlfriend on the stand, sealing a legal tie that momentarily diverted attention. But forensic evidence and expert testimony ultimately proved far more compelling to the juries. When jurors heard medical examiners describe how specific impact patterns on bone fragments correlated with blunt force consistent with the tools found in Bundy's possession, or how soil and pollen matrix patterns tied burial sites to regions he traveled through, each piece of evidence became a brick in a forensic mosaic that could not be dismantled through rhetoric alone. Ultimately, Bundy was convicted and sentenced to death multiple times. On January 24th, 1989, the sentence was carried out in the electric chair, but his impact on forensic practice endured. Investigators began to exchange data across states more effectively. Behavioral analysts used the patterns established in Bundy's crimes to refine offender profiling techniques. Bite mark comparison, fiber analysis, and soil stratification studies, once peripheral methods, became integral to building strong, scientifically supported criminal cases. Bundy's case also influenced how forensic psychologists understood predatory violence. Experts noted that his approach, the calculated use of deception, controlled physical dominance, and gradual escalation of violence, represented a type of offender whose outward normalcy made him particularly difficult to detect without meticulous investigative collaboration and scientific evidence. Today, when we reconstruct his crimes in the mind's eye, we do so not just through the horror of what happened, but through the precision of how it was uncovered. How a fragment of fiber, a microscopic soil particle, and a dental impression became tools of accountability. How medical trauma patterns told stories that witnesses could not. How science spoke for those who could not speak again. And that is the enduring legacy of the forensic reconstruction of these crimes. An intricate, interwoven tapestry of physical evidence, expert testimony, and relentless pursuit of truth.